Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. My name is Nick, and we've also got Kirill here on this webinar. While we are waiting for a few more people to join us, let's spend a little bit of time talking about conjointly in our services, and then we'll move on to conjoint analysis itself. So at Conjointly, we do product and pricing research. We help companies test features, prices, new product concepts, claims, and other elements of innovation across consumer goods, industrial goods, services, software offerings, and so on. We make use of various sophisticated quantitative research methods, such as Conjoint and MaxDiff. And we offer both automated tools and expert support. So if you need any help with running your study, whether it's by yourself or if you want us to act as an agency, please get in touch with us after this webinar. But today we're not talking so much about us, but rather about conjoint analysis as a research method. I see a few more people have joined, so we'll continue with our introductions first. Let's now hear from Kirill.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Kirill. I'm a quantitative market research manager here at Conjointly. My experience is largely in conjoint analysis, designing, planning, and executing studies, usually for feature selection, also for pricing, and I'm based in the Bay Area.
And my name is Nick. I'm the founder of Conjointly. It's the company. I look after a few activities, but my favorite is developing new methods and also advancing some of the standard research techniques, such as conjoint analysis. My background is in consulting, and before that, I studied marketing at the Australian National University. And we've also got Harrigan here on the call with us. He will be happy to help with any questions during this call. Now, it looks like everybody has joined, so we can dive into talking about conjoint. Today, we're going to cover a few topics. First, we're going to talk about what is conjoint analysis. Then we're going to set up our own study and launch it. While we are waiting for respondents to come into that study, we're going to cover the theory of conjoint analysis. Specifically, we'll talk about attributes, levels, whether price should be included, how much sample you need, what is preference share simulation, and what are the different types of conjoint. Hopefully that will give us enough time to get some responses, and then we're going to review the results of the study. And afterwards, there'll be some time to answer questions. Okay, so let's talk about what is conjoint analysis. Conjoint is a research method that works by breaking a product or service down into its components. Those components are called attributes and levels. So here on the screen, you see the product, which is a smartphone, and we have identified a few attributes or characteristics of this product. So those are brand, screen size, color, and price. These are not exhaustive, so there could be some additional characteristics such as, say, thickness or size or weight or memory amount on the phone. So those would still be attributes. But typically for conjoint, you would choose a limited number of attributes, not all the characteristics of a product. And each attribute has different levels. For example, brand can be iPhone, Samsung, Sony, and screen size can be, for example, 5, 6, 5.5 inches, or it could be 4 inches and so on. So those values of characteristics of a product are called levels of the attributes. That's the first thing that we do with conjoint analysis. The second thing is that we assemble those levels into different alternatives. So those alternatives are just a combination of different levels that we've identified, one level per attribute, and then we show them to respondents, typically several at a time, and ask to choose one of them. So that is called a choice task. So we're asking them to choose one of the alternatives, which is a combination of different levels. Typically, we don't do it just once. Typically, when respondent sees a dozen questions, this gives us enough information to understand what that respondent likes in a product, what levels drive their preference. By asking them to make repeated choices, we learn about the trade-offs that they're making. So whether they are happy to go for a higher price if it has a certain color or if it has a certain size, and so on. And one important thing is that for every respondent, the choices and the order of choices, the order of alternatives, sometimes even the order of attributes is randomized. So for every respondent, the survey looks a little bit different. So it's not quite the same. Once we've done that, we calculate individual preference profiles for all respondents. So we collate the data. So here on the left-hand side, you see the original answers. So this table covers the first choice set. So we are circling the alternative that a respondent chose. And there were 4 alternatives in this exercise. The first one is iPhone 6 inches wide for $1,000. The second has Sony 5.5 inches. The third one is Samsung 5 inches. And the fourth alternative, which we typically give to respondents, is to say they would not buy any of the products. So it's none of the above. And we do it for all the choice sets for this respondent. Then we typically want to code it in a format similar to what you see on the right here. So each row here corresponds to an alternative. So set means the choice set. Alternative means the number of the order of the alternative. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it repeats for the second set and so on. Choice indicates whether the respondent made the choice of this alternative in this choice set or not. So 1 means they did, 0 means they don't. So we have 5 choice sets, so we have 5 ones in this column, and then the rest is coding the values of the levels as 0s and 1s typically. So the first one, for example, here is opt-out. So whether it's an opt-out alternative, and we see that every fourth one is an opt-out because we see every fourth one here is an opt-out. So it's they're saying none of the above. Then the next column shows whether it's a Sony or not. So the second alternative is a Sony. The third alternative is a Samsung. We don't have a separate column for iPhone because if we have Sony and Samsung here already, and both are 0, it means that it has to be iPhone. So we don't want any redundant information in this table. So this should probably look somewhat familiar because this is basically coding for a simple or rather multiple linear regression. And in fact, multiple linear regression is one of the methods we could use for analyzing conjoint analysis results. So this is actually what we did here at the bottom. So we calculated coefficients of multiple linear regression. And this is typically not the way we do it in actual studies where we use hierarchical Bayesian multinomial logic, so much more involved and complicated model. But what you see here at the bottom is one way to analyze. And this actually already gives us enough information to start interpreting the results. So from these coefficients, we can say that first, the respondent tends not to pick none of the above. So it's a large negative coefficient. Relative to iPhone, which is not present here, so that's the baseline or what we set as benchmark. So relative to iPhone, they dislike Sony and Samsung as well because both coefficients are negative. They tend to prefer larger sizes because the coefficient for size is positive. They prefer white. Relative to white, they prefer turquoise because it's a positive coefficient, but they dislike silver, again, relative to white, not in absolute terms. And they prefer paying lower prices because the coefficient for price is negative. So this is already something we could infer from these coefficients here. But it doesn't stop here. We typically want to calculate several different types of analysis from conjoint, and this is why this method is so rich and useful. We can calculate the importance of different attributes to respondents, the preferences for levels. We can simulate preference shares. We can do an estimation of willingness to pay for different features, again, relative to some sort of benchmark. We can understand price elasticity of demand, and we can do customer segmentation. So we can segment the market based on their preferences, not just on the characteristics of demographics and psychographics and other things. So that's the power of conjoint analysis from this choice exercise that we give to respondents. We understand their preferences for each individual, and then we use that information to get all this rich information. So now it's time to set up our own study and launch it. So I am going to continue sharing my screen and just switch to the platform. Here we have already pre-set up the study, so I'm just going to walk you through this. So we are looking at strawberry flavored probiotic yogurts. We have 5 attributes here. We have brand, we have probiotic claim, we have pack type, we have whether it has an eco claim or not, and then we have price. So price is given per 6 ounce. So that's we typically want to be very specific. So we specify what's the size of the pack is here. Then within brand, we have 2 levels. We have Granny's Mix and Orange Fox. Within probiotic content claim, we have 4 different claims of probiotics. We also put an image here just to make it look like yogurt, strawberry yogurt. And then we have pack type levels, glass, plastic, or wood. And and I think that's all the things that we're testing. So this is an interactive session. So if you have any suggestions, what else we could put in here, please feel free to put your suggestions in the chat. If not, if no suggestions, we can just go ahead and launch it. Actually, before we launch it, let's take a look what the survey looks like to respondents. Yeah, so we tell them it's a survey of about strawberry flavored probiotic yogurts. We show them different alternatives. So they have 3 alternatives here, plus none of the above, so 4 alternatives in total. So each alternative shows the brand, the probiotic claim, the type of pack. Some of them show eco, others show no eco. So this one we're just hiding. So it doesn't say no eco, it just doesn't show anything. And here we have the price per 6 ounce. And this task repeats several times. Typically, it's a dozen times that we want to show it to respondents. If we don't show it enough, we might not collect enough information about each respondent. If we show too many of them, then we might fatigue the respondent and they will be less likely to respond truthfully. And here we also sometimes want to introduce questions in the middle of the conjoint exercise just to, again, reduce fatigue. So that can be easily done by just mixing those questions into the conjoint block. Okay, so no input yet. So we are just going to go ahead and collect quick feedback. While it's launching, there is a question: how did you decide the levels? So they were just prepared before the before this exercise, before the webinar, Kirill is actually going to talk a little bit more about levels, how you can decide what levels to put into the test. In terms of how did you make sure that combinations make sense when to be compared? So typically you want to prohibit combinations of levels within one alternative that would not make sense to respondents. For example, if you have kind of wooden, or let's say you have like a plastic bottle, which is one level in one attribute, and you have another one that says does not contain plastic in another attribute, so you don't want to show those levels together. So that you can do through prohibitions of different pairs. So that's typically something you do here. That probably answers that question. Okay, so we've launched the study. Now we're just waiting for respondents to come in and answer the questions. And while we do that, we have some questions. We have some time for theory, and Kirill will take you through the theory of conjoint analysis.
Certainly, thank you. So indeed, while we wait for those results to come in, we'll talk about some of these more basic fundamentals of conjoint. Maybe we'll touch on some of these questions that are coming up now, but we'll also have time for question and answer at the end, I believe. So if we don't get to that now, we'll have a chance to talk about them later. So starting at the very most important part, how do we define what attributes should be included? So attributes, as you may remember, are the different dimensions which define a product. So we had with the phone example, we had various different factors that could impact what overall the phone was: the screen size, the color, the shape, perhaps the memory, what have you. So the first characteristic you want to keep in mind is that you want to describe the product fully and cover all of the quote-unquote important attributes. Here and elsewhere in Conjoint, when we say important, we mean that the attribute or varying the attribute has an influence on individuals' choices. So if people would regularly consider an attribute when they were buying a specific type of product, you should aim to include that attribute in your study. Of course, we don't want to include everything under the sun, so we do try to recommend keeping the entire conjoint to a maximum of 7 attributes. This is not really a gold standard or anything, so you can exceed it if need be, but keep in mind that this does add to the respondent burden. So it is just worth taking into consideration as a whole. If you have a very complicated conjoint, for example, we've done some with clients for electronic devices that are used by professionals in an engineering setting, those can be extremely complicated, and they're always trying to get in a dozen or more attributes. And in some cases it works. If the audience is very technical and has patience to read through that many details, it may work. But for most consumer studies, you want to keep it digestible. It's worth noting that some attributes will be binary as opposed to having lists of levels. So you might have present or absent features, as we saw with the eco modifier in the yogurts. And other things that should be kept in mind is that attributes really need to define the product itself and not other characteristics outside of the product. So for example, you wouldn't want to have any consumer characteristics or such as gender in the attribute list. That's something that would be either specific to the respondent or you could describe as a context. So for example, you might have a separate conjoint to study people's perceptions of a product purchased online versus a product purchased in store. You wouldn't be able to have online or in store as an attribute in a conjoint really, because it has to apply to all of the choices on the page at the same time. Now that said, we are going to have a few sort of pop quiz questions throughout this sort of academic section of the presentation here. So the first is a question here on which of the following is not an appropriate attribute for a probiotic yogurt product. Would that be and here is not an appropriate attribute. Is it the flavor, the price, the pack size, or the time of purchase? I'll give you guys about 5 seconds to think about that. And then I will reveal that in this case, the time of purchase would be the inappropriate attribute because it does not really define one of the products so much as describe the purchasing setting. If you did want to study time of purchase, you could, again, separate the study into multiple different cells, where one group of respondents might be asked about purchasing, say, a drink in the evening, and the other half might be asked about purchasing a drink at lunch. So you'd have very different contexts for different results, but they're not attributes, they're contexts for the study. Now, going on to what constitutes an attribute, of course, are the levels. These are simply the values that each attribute can take. So, for example, for color, as an attribute, we might have red, blue, transparent, etc. And any attribute features could be included as well. So you could have tiers or binary levels, but essentially these are the levels that actually make up the products. So, of course, you have to have at least 2 per attribute, otherwise we're not really studying that attribute. If the phone is always blue in all cases across all the choices, then we're not learning anything about color, so it should be omitted. But if we do have multiple levels, then it makes sense. The levels should be precise, so we shouldn't put in ranges if at all possible. For example, here we're listing specifics for car engine size, and we wouldn't put something like less than 1.5 liters as a descriptor, unless that was really what people saw on the package. So you might see less than half a gram of sugar or something on actual packaging, then that would be appropriate, but we should be as specific as possible. The third point here, I think, is the most important, and that is that the levels need to sound realistic, specifically to the consumer. And this is somewhere where I like to point out that as researchers, we often get stuck thinking about these products in very technical or internal vocabularies, and often those need to be translated into what is actually shown on the shelf or to people making purchase decisions. Finally, we need to ensure that the levels are mutually exclusive. So we wouldn't want to have, in this example, we wouldn't want to have recycled and weave-like as, I think I've lost myself here. Right, recycled and weave-like as levels of a single attribute, because a product could be both or neither. So we want to separate those into mutually exclusive attributes. So in this case, we would separate it into texture, weave-like or simple texture, and another attribute that could just be binary for recycling, so recycled or not. Another little pop quiz here. Which of the following levels is not a good example for a conjoint level, especially for a probiotic yogurt? Is it with this unpronounceable thing, $5 per 100 grams, 100 to 200 grams, or no sugar added? Again, I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to ponder. And by now you should have figured out that it is the 100 to 200 grams, because it is not really specific, while all the others are descriptive and realistic. Continuing along, we have often the question of whether or not to include price as an attribute in the conjoint. Generally speaking, if it's practical and if price is really, and usually is a real attribute, then it should be included if possible. This has 2 major benefits. The first is that it keeps the study grounded in reality. So respondents aren't simply choosing the shiniest or most interesting product, they're choosing one that would actually align with what they'd be willing to spend on it. So you can imagine the difference between which of the following items would you consider trying versus which of the following items would you consider buying. You could imagine that different values take hold, and so we have to be aware of that. And including price helps keep these decisions realistic. The second major benefit of including price is that it gives us a commonality across different studies. Typically speaking, you don't want to compare conjoint results from one study to another, but if price is included in both and the range of prices is similar, then it's a little bit more kosher to compare those results, or at least have a bit of comparability across these studies. And now another quick pop quiz here. Can you and should you include price? Option first being no, you can't, no, you shouldn't, yes, you should, or it's a must. This one's a bit of an easy one, and just reveal it right away. Yes, you should, if at all possible, include price in the study. Of course, the range of prices that you include is also an important consideration. It should be kept realistic and within the range of what you're interested in studying. Right. Another consideration that's often, it always comes up, is how much sample is required for a conjoint study. Generally speaking, you'll need at least a couple of hundred people. Again, this is because we're not looking at these results in a traditional way. We're computing a statistical model that is estimating these parameters, and so we really need enough meat for that statistical model to work. And the best way to, in practice, at least when using our platform or the platform that we offer, the best way to estimate the sample size is to actually mock up the study. So if you know you're going to have a study with 5 attributes that each have 5 levels, you can go into the platform and create, even with placeholder levels, a study that matches that specification, and it'll estimate how many respondents you'll need in order to capture enough data for that. So some characteristics that will impact the sample size requirement, obviously the number of attributes and levels. As that goes up, you will need more sample. The number of questions asked per respondent. So if we increase the number of choice tasks that every respondent answers, then we won't need as many respondents. This is a trade-off that we have to make, that usually we leave it at about 12 per respondent. We do have the option to lower or raise that amount if it's appropriate. So if we have a particularly complicated conjoint task, it might make sense to reduce how many a person sees. So if it's, for example, choosing a health insurance plan that has lots of complicated levels, maybe we only want each individual human to go through 5 of those or 6 before we think they'll be incapable of providing good data. And in other situations, maybe the task is very easy and we think we can get more information out of each respondent. So we might bump it up to 20 and therefore collect more data per person, requiring fewer total people. The number of alternatives included in each choice set, so that would be how many choices are they choosing from. If that goes up, then we are again collecting more data per person. So if we increase the number of alternatives, it would reduce the total sample size. And any complexity that we add to the study, such as prohibited pairs, will also drive up the sample size requirement. It's also worth keeping in mind that if you intend on cutting the data in any way, you should account for that when deciding on your sample. So if the system estimates you need 300 people, but you really intend on cutting the data into 4 different cells, it might make sense to get perhaps 200 per cell. So you might actually be looking at 800 respondents as opposed to that original 300. Another question here, can you do conjoint for only 1 or 2 respondents? So this is a little bit of a trick question, but the options here are no, it's not possible with limited complexity, yes, it's commonly done, or it has never been done. So I'll think about that for a moment. And maybe I'll just share here that it's not the 2 extremes. So right, it is possible, but needs to be limited in complexity. And you can expect fairly directional or non-robust results. Generally speaking, it's quite rare. And another thing we want to talk about is, rather than a consideration that you'd have at the beginning of a study, this is more what we'd have in the analysis phase. So we saw earlier what the choice task looked like to respondents, where the individual would see several options on the page composed of different attributes and levels, and they would select which one most appeals to them. What the preference share simulation does is sort of this in reverse, is now that we've estimated individual level parameters for this model, we can predict what people would have selected if we had shown them a specific set of combinations. So what we can do now is we can test different hypothetical scenarios. We can test a baseline that reflects reality today. We can see what happens if we introduce our new product, what relative share we might get of the preference. And that is, again, to say what percentage of the choice would have been ours in a choice task that respondents would have seen. It is important to keep in mind that these simulations are sort of an analog of the study. So if we're getting results from a simulation and it's saying the preference share is 30% for our new product, that is, it isn't directly translated to market share. It's mimicking what people would have chosen in a study that's put right in front of them on the screen. So we're not including, the model cannot capture distribution effects or advertising effects or anything like that. So all this is to say is that this preference share simulation is not exactly a market share simulation, but it's a good step towards it. And so we're able to specify any combination of products that we'd like with the specific levels, in price, and see exactly what the relative preference share would be. So now another pop quiz here. If we have 3 alternatives in the conjoint study itself, a bit of a numerical question here, and there was a none option, and we model 4 different products and none, how many different concepts will we have simulation outputs for? So sort of like one of those word problems. All right, so if you followed that very carefully, you'd see that we would end up with 5 preference shares, because we would have 1 for each of the products and then a 5th one for the none. This also demonstrates that we can test different numbers of products and simulations than were included in the study, so we don't have to be completely mimicking those choice tasks identically in the simulations. We can go to many more products if we like. Now, finally, a few notes on sort of other conjoints that are out there and ways that they're classified. So we've set up a study just now, which is sort of a standard traditional choice-based conjoint. There are lots of other kinds out there, many of which are uncommon, but they're still worth knowing about. So just to go down the list, there are ratings-based conjoints, in which instead of choosing a discrete option, you would give a rating to each one of the options on the page, similar to a chip allocation, in which you would allocate a bunch of chips to each of the options on the page. So you might have, say, 100 points to allocate across the 5 options. There's also an amount to purchase. This is also called a volumetric conjoint. Here a person could go through and say, I'll have 1 of these and 2 of these and 3 of these. And again, all of these, by the way, lead to similar conclusions, not conclusions, but similar outputs. And so they're fairly identical in terms of overall setup and processing, but they answer slightly different questions. Then the best worst conjoint is also known as a max diff, is another choice-based one where the respondents are choosing both their most preferred and their least preferred alternative on the page. And then we have a ranking-based conjoint in which they just rank the options, best to worst. And finally, the choice-based conjoint is the common traditional one. It's my understanding that about 80% or more of conjoint studies that are done are a choice-based conjoint. Now, by questioning approach, so there is the standard conjoint, in which the questionnaire is sort of fixed ahead of time. And in this case, when we say questionnaire, we also mean the design, experimental design that is used to determine what respondents see on those choice tasks. And there is also an adaptive conjoint. In adaptive, the experiment is adapted as data comes in. It may respond to the individual person or to the data that's come in before them. But in those cases, the experimental design is changed on the fly to optimize a certain parameter, either to reduce the confidence intervals for the part-worth utilities or to exclude options that are not being considered. Additionally, we separate these conjoints by the type of the design. So here we put them into generic, which is sort of an unrestricted design, if you will, where we don't have very many restrictions on what levels can show up with what. We can have the prohibitions, but those are generally limited. And brand-specific, also known as alternative-specific conjoint, is a version of conjoint where we have a bit more control over what levels appear with which. An easy example here, I think, is that if you have different phones, for example, you might have different features that are available only on Android or only on iPhone. And so we may have several attributes that could just not apply to Android at all, and we'd be able to set up a study to reflect that using a brand-specific conjoint. But finally, we have the ability to show either a full profile of the conjoint test, that is, that every respondent will see all of the attributes on every page, or if there are studies where there are many attributes, we could have a partial profile study in which each page only shows a subset of those attributes. It is, again, not super common, but can be used when there is an excessive amount of attributes that need to be studied within one conjoint. So I know you're all eager for this final pop quiz here. So one more question, see if you've been paying attention. What type of study did we launch earlier on today? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't chip allocation or max diff. It was a generic conjoint. Very exciting. I wonder if the results from that study are ready yet.
Thank you, Kirill. Yes, let's check if the results from that study are indeed ready or not. Let's first update this and see how many responses we have. We have 21, so we can start calculating the results of the study. While they are calculating, which the system says will take 3 minutes, I think there are some questions that we can go through from the chat. So there was a question about minimum sample size. Like Kirill said, the minimum sample size to run a conjoint is really just one respondent. In fact, earlier on, when we looked at that respondent with 5 choice sets, that was just analyzing one response, response from one respondent. So you can analyze it, but typically you need a few hundred, and the system should recommend the sample size. Yeah, I think that's so far that's the only question in the chat, and we have the results here. So they're based on 22 responses, which is not a huge number, or rather 21, which is not a huge number. So not a lot of what we'll see here will be very robust. Typically, well, for this one it says 50 responses as a minimum. Well, I think actually it says it's at 150 is because we're doing quick feedback. So. So we shouldn't really rely on these results. Plus, I should caveat that we use quick feedback function, which just sent invitation to Amazon Talk participants. So they were not pre-screened to be biased or probiotic yogurts, and they're not in any particular country. They could be from a mix of countries. So what we're seeing here is just quick, really quick and dirty results. With actual sampling, you need to screen respondents. You need to make sure that they qualify and so on. But this still gives us an opportunity to look at what kind of outputs you can get from a conjoint analysis. So the first one is relative importance of attributes. So this chart shows that it answers the question, how important is each attribute relative to other attributes across consumers? And it takes into account that each consumer values slightly different product attributes. And we see here that price is the one that stands out. That's the most important attribute here, followed by probiotic content claim, then pack type, and then we have brand and eco-label roughly equal here. We can also switch on confidence intervals, and we see that even with a small sample size, it looks like price would still likely be the most important attribute, because you see its confidence intervals are here. They don't intersect with any other confidence intervals. Next output is preferences for levels. So here we are looking at the chart that shows relative preferences averaged across respondents. And we see that on average, Granny's mix is the one with slightly more preference. If we switch on confidence intervals, we see that they intersect with Orange Fox. So the result is only directional. It's not statistically significant. Then we can see that the first couple of claims outperformed the third and fourth probiotic claim. We see that respondents strongly prefer lower pricing, which of course makes sense. They also seem to like glass bottle, which also makes sense. And they seem to actually like where it says no eco claim. But if you switch on confidence intervals, again, you see that the two intersect, and it could be reversed if we had larger sample size. Some additional outputs. So this is just, again, this is the price, preference for price. We see it decreases as we increase price. It's exactly the same as what we see here. And then we also have distribution of preferences. So from this chart, we can see that roughly 50-50 split between the two brands. We see that there are 45% like eco claim and 55 don't, and so on. Then we can also calculate marginal willingness to pay. So marginal willingness to pay is a metric that allows us to convert those preferences into monetary values. So it allows us to say what is the average respondent's, how much does an average respondent willing to sacrifice in order to upgrade from one feature to another feature. And then we can see that they're willing to pay 6 cents more for Orange Fox relative to Granny's Mix. If we set this as baseline, this Bifidobacteria plus Lactobacilli as the baseline, then we can see that for the Bifidobacteria santium, they're willing to pay 8 cents more, and so on. Again, we can look at confidence intervals. They are pretty wide here. I think of all these things, it's only fair to say that the glass bottle is something that people are willing to pay more because both for plastic and wood, you see they're both negative relative to the glass bottle baseline. Then another output we have is ranked list of product concepts. So here we can see different combinations of levels, and we can see that we can see the value to customers. So that is basically calculating if we offer this combination, how does it compare to, for example, this combination? All these values in Conjoint, they're relative. So we're always talking about this combination relative to this combination, and these this value column just helps us compare between them. It's not value in terms of dollars here. So that's what you get from a conjoint, from just analyzing aggregate results. The second bit that you get from it is the simulator. The simulator allows you to put in different hypothetical scenarios. For example, we can say that Granny's Mix is our product and Orange Fox is our competitor. And then we can say that currently we offer this, say we are priced at $3.15. We offer, say, for example, in wood, and we are not eco-friendly. And Orange Fox is offering this, for example, at a higher price. They're eco-friendly and they offer it in glass bottle. And then we can set up this simulation and see what is the percentage of respondents who would go for us versus Orange Fox. Let's put orange for Orange Fox, and Granny's Mix will be blue. So we'll be the blue one. So we see that with this configuration, 64% of respondents would go for Granny's Mix and 34% for Orange Fox. And then we can do more from this. We can, for example, say, what happens if we change price? So we want to create a new worksheet here where we'll be varying the price of our brand, keeping everything else constant. So we're keeping the competition offering constant, we're keeping our features constant, and we can see what happens if we increase price. And it looks like as we increase price, our preference share drops. And it looks like people are actually going for none of the above rather than our competition mostly. So you see that the share of none of the above increases. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at preference shares. So we have the price as the horizontal axis and percentage of respondents who would pick our brand, the blue brand, as a vertical axis. And also on the right-hand side, we see revenue projections. So we see what is the projected revenue. It's calculated simply as the preference share multiplied by price multiplied by just some hypothetical number of units sold. We put 1,000 typically just to make the scale look good. So we can see here that at this point it's 315. So probably what we are originally offering, that's the point that maximizes our revenue. Maybe we could try another one. We could try maybe, for example, not quite 415, but maybe, for example, 375. and try to recalculate it and see maybe if 375 performs a little bit better. Yeah, that's 375, and it doesn't. So 315 is still the one that helps optimize revenue. So this is one way to use the simulator. Another way is to choose features. For example, say we know our optimal price, and we just want to see whether we should try to offer different pack types. So now we are with wood pack, and let's see what happens if we go for glass or plastic. So it looks like with glass, we are gaining quite a bit of share. So that means that if the costs of production for wood and glass are the same, then glass seems like a clear winner here. So that's what you can conclude from this chart. And we can also check that on the right-hand side with revenue projections. It's also saying that we'll get more revenue from the glass option. So that's the overview of the simulator. And I think there is a question in the simulator. If we leave one of the attributes or level empty, don't select, would this affect the results of the model? So you actually can't do that. You can't. There is no option to leave them empty. You have to specify something because this is mimicking what respondents saw in the survey. They saw at least one of several options, so they did not see kind of the absence of that option. It is a little bit different from in this attribute because we had just a binary attribute where it was like eco, no eco, but you see both of them are kind of levels that we specified at the outset. So this empty no eco claim, we don't show the claim, we still have it here, so we can still kind of like specify this is a no eco claim. But you can't just, for example, delete price, because then kind of there was no situation where respondents saw the kind of like no price shown to them. Then there is the question: is it a self-operate platform? Yes, it is. Yeah, so you can freely log in, and I think that company that you referenced, you'll be happily surprised with many options here. Okay, so we actually already segued to any questions. Are there any more questions to cover? Please feel free to put them either in the Q&A or in the chat. Okay, looks like we don't have a lot of questions today. So, oh no, there is one. How were you able to complete a hypothetical assessment of which attributes would have been picked? Oh, how? So again, it's a question on the simulator. So, it all comes back to the fact that we, from the choice tasks, we estimate individual level preferences. So we try to understand what does individual A prefer. What does individual B prefer? What does individual C prefer? So basically, we get a matrix of their preferences. So you can call it a profile of preferences, which basically has numbers that show relative preferences for one feature versus another feature. And then we use basically choice modeling mathematical theory to understand if we offer this combination versus this combination, where would they go? So a lot of this theory is pretty old. There is an academic called McFadden. He won a Nobel Prize for a topic in this area. And basically that's how we do it. So it's a logistic. probably called the logit model, probably for estimating the where would respondents go once you know the profiles. But you get the profiles through Bayesian, hierarchical Bayesian multinomial logit. So it is Bayesian analysis, yeah. If you want to know more about this, we have a whole section on the website about simulations. So on our website, we have plenty of guides, and here is a whole section about preferential simulations that they explain the theory and functionality and a lot of the considerations for preferential simulations. Okay, so I think that's the end of the questions. So I would like to say thank you all for coming to the webinar. I think it is recorded, so we will be sharing the recording afterwards as well. And yeah, thank you very much and have a great day.